Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today I have the privilege of being in conversation with an Atlanta-based artist. Please welcome Lewinale Havette. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me. Thank you for welcoming me.
Absolutely. It's good to kind of branch out. You know, I'm up here in Baltimore. I'm doing my thing in the Mid-Atlantic. But as I can go down south, start to connect with people, start having conversations.
Yeah. You know, there's talent outside of, New York and Boston and DC and places like that. It's good to venture out and see what else is out there. So kudos to you for doing that.
Absolutely. And I think it's an opportunity to bridge communities and, lead to that exchange of, maybe having folks coming up here to check and having folks going down there to check and maybe to at least at a minimum, cool conversations come out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get too deep into the story, to the podcast, really, could you share your story and maybe your first memory of, art, your first memory where you're like, I think I love art. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, the thing with art is that there's so much that goes into, one becoming an artist. We could get into the nature versus nurture debate. So sure. I'm sure there are things that are unknown that kind of helped me forge my path into becoming an artist. But the things that are known was that, when I was younger, my parents and I traveled quite a bit. From different country to different country. And I wasn't always able to speak the language, and having a language barrier, it's difficult. But I learned that with my art, I was able to communicate clearly. I was able to help my schoolmates, and friends kind of see me as more than just this foreigner, as really human. And so I think it was from that, from my earliest memory of those times that I was able to say, I think there's something to this. Like this is the tool I can use to communicate how I am, how I feel. Being introverted is really difficult at times, but my heart is kind of a communication tool. So I think from that early age, I would say maybe about 6 years old, around that time, was when I decided that, this is like a really cool thing. So.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, early on recognizing it as, like I'm a little introverted as well. And it's like, which surprises people all the time. It's like, but you do a podcast and you talk to people.
People think introversion means that you absolutely want to shut yourself out from the world, but there's, it's a skill. So it's, But anyway, yes.
It's like I can be like, it's funny. It's like, I always look at it as where the energy comes from. And, I get energy, from, being able to maybe have a one-on-one conversation. I get a little bit more energy from that than speaking in front of an audience. That's actually draining the energy. It's like I'm burning through it.
Exactly. Yep.
It's like when you have like, when you're younger, you may have had a toy and you're like, this thing eats batteries. It just takes, that's what it is for me.
Yeah, same. That is the exact definition of introversion, and extroversion is where you gain most of your energy from. So yeah, you're spot on.
So, and you touched on it a little bit. Is there a life experience that comes to mind that really like has crafted or shaped your creative sensibility?
Yes, there is life experience that comes to mind. A bit of that as well. But also, like, I remember when I was a little girl, we were born into a civil war, and I've touched on this a bit, but I was born into a civil war in my country, in Liberia. And it's interesting, the memories I have from that are mostly visual, and a lot of them are stories, but mostly, visual things that kind of stay in the head. And I think coming from that, I've always kind of been a bit different than a lot of my peers. And, that ties back into, the ability to be able to properly communicate or properly kind of just pour out what's on my head, what's in my head, what's on my mind. So I think that early, very, very early formative experience was kind of what shaped my my artistic sensibility. And of course, other things throughout the years. But if I have to remember from the very beginning, I would say those visuals, those images, those feelings that I had from being born into such a chaotic situation, I think definitely developed me in a different way.
Yeah. I have a friend here locally. I think he moved up to Boston for school, but
Mhm.
artist named Alfred. He's Liberian as well. And as
Mhm.
you remember, it was something that was coming up from an art standpoint, and people were like
Mhm.
freaking out. And he was like, "Man, we had like a war." He's like, he's like,
Yeah, it's like when you've been through a war, like nothing else seems that like frightening or deep or like difficult anymore. You know, it's interesting. It's like, yeah, but have you been through a war? Like,
"No, but I can't get this grant." Like, all right, cool.
right. Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah, it's just like it's all perspective, and I
It's
just
all
look at people.
perspective. Yeah.
I just look at people like because I'm like 30, I'm 37 or what have you, and
Uh-huh.
I'll talk to people, and it's like, wow, you have no idea what's going on, do you? You know,
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's all perspective. You're
absolutely.
right. Yeah.
So let's talk about your current body of work. Let's
Mhm.
like ultimately, and this may sound gauche, so forgive me, but I think it's the broadest way of doing it.
Mhm.
What is your work about? And I got several bullet points, but I at least want to start there.
Yeah, of course. My work. So currently, I'm delving into oil painting. Before I was doing mixed media. My message tends to kind of remain the same, and it's all about discovering an inner power, an inner magic, and using that magic and that power to kind of form. And you can't, there's only a certain degree to which you can form your destiny, but kind of helping shape that. The reason I focus a lot on inner power and inner magic is because again, going back to how I was born and where I was born, kind of have that power taken away from you, your life decided for you. Growing up, I had a very strict mother, a very religious father who was a minister. And so most of my life, I kind of had decisions made for me. Things were decided for me. And, now as I become older, I'm, searching for, I have this, kind of power now and freedom and things like that. But it's something that I don't take for granted because I haven't always had that.
Mhm.
And so a lot of my work deals with just exploring that inner power, that inner dominance.
So, and I think this funny is great. This shows you that you've done an interview before, and because you're ahead of the curve right now, you actually
Oh,
answered one of
thank
those
you.
bullet points. So shout out to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, if you will, could you talk about your process, materials, techniques that you use to create your current work, and is there a connection like between the message that you're putting out there and maybe the mode or the materials that you're using?
Yes. So we'll start with the process. The process
Sure.
usually comes from a memory or a dream, a feeling, or just a desire to kind of talk about something that I'm having difficulty expressing in words. So typically it starts there, with, I guess you would call that inspiration. And then with my process, I'm sorry, with so the connection between the way I create my art and I guess my inspiration and materials I use. Yes, I will say oil painting definitely has more fluidity and freedom to it. And so I like that about it. I like that most times, but sometimes I don't because it's highly unpredictable. But I will say, kind of having these random thoughts and these random feelings, or kind of pulls from that because you really never know where it's going to go, right? There's only a certain
Sure.
extent that you can predict, what's going to happen. So I like the randomness of it, and the way I create, like I start in the studio, I'm painting, you just never quite know. My old work was heavily based on photography. So I kind of always had an idea.
Mhm.
With the oil, it's just kind of, you just never know. So I really like the unpredictability of it. So I think that's the connection it has.
I like that.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, you're welcome. And I always kind of look for those opportunities where, folks try to put this, and you mentioned that, it's kind of, you're not sure how it might go. It's a certain degree of not necessarily volatility, but I'll use that as the placeholder. And it's
Mhm.
like, this could go here, this could go there. We're not quite sure.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's in this podcast,
Mhm.
like there's some questions that's sent over, but we could talk about cartoons for half an hour if you wanted.
Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
like, this is cool.
Yeah.
And I've had people who will come on for an interview and they're like, hey, do you want me to answer in sound bites? Do you want me to have 3-minute answers?
Mm-hmm.
And I provide very little direction in that regard because I want something that feels like authentic and something that feels like natural. And it's an intuitiveness there. And
exactly. Yeah.
as we go through it, I like to try to edit as I'm going through. And it's like, let's live craft. It's almost as if someone's like live painting in front of an audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how did you know, or what was the feelings that you had when you were like, I think I'm going to take this, I think I'm going to approach, art as a career, this is going to take up a lot of my time. This is going to be a big part of my life. What were the feelings that you had when you came to that realization? Was there a sign? Was there a suggestion maybe from a mentor or a friend? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so, it's like my mother said, Lou, you've been an artist your entire life. It's interesting because when you try to do other things, which I have, I worked in corporate for the majority of my, working days, I would say. You just never really quite feel fulfilled. Even if you're great at your job, even if you're doing what you have to do, you just never really quite, you're not fulfilled. And when I decided to come and become a full-time artist, I was extremely nervous. I was hesitant. You don't know, because I didn't know anyone who was an artist. It's like, how do you be, and how are you an artist? What is that like? And so there was, it was frightening. It was frightening, but I was excited. And I think that excitement for me kind of took over and was, more empowering than, the fear that I had or the hesitation. And, there were moments that were difficult, as, starting any small business is, because that's what I consider being an artist, is having your own business, right? But it was just that thing, like, this is what I'm going to do. My husband was actually the one who was, his personality is very different than mine, which is a great thing because it helps me, stay balanced. But he was like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you actually want to do? I was actually working as a broker, and then I graduated and started to work as a senior sales partner in an art gallery. He was like, what do you actually want to do? I was like, well, I want to be an artist, but just saying it, not really thinking. He's like, then just do it. I was like, just do it. And so that was the defining moment for me.
That's great. Having that person that gives that nudge, especially if they're close to you. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Because it's people who, like, I look back at maybe when I went to college and just someone told me, actually I was in college and I was leaving to go for, interviews, and you get to that point where you're like, what am I going to do as a career? Yeah. And I just remember I went to like one of these career fairs, and I just remember it was a recruiter from a big company, a big telecom company. It was like, you're a marketing person. And I was like, excuse me? Like, she just like pointed me out like from the blue. And, I'm 6'4". So it's just like, wow, you do things. And I found that was kind of similar to when I made the choice of what school I wanted to go to for high school or what have you. It's kind of like, these are those big decisions. And it really wasn't me choosing it, but it was just someone saying, you should do this. And that felt like some degree of empowerment, but it was people that didn't really know me. So if someone came to me, like now, my partner, she'll say, hey, you should do this. And having an idea and an understanding of what I go through in it, what it takes, and that trust that, oh, Rob said he's going to do this. So, okay, I need to show up. I need to be there when he says, I'm going to do a movie night, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do this series of interviews and giving feedback and context. That's when you get that trusted feedback from someone, it feels really special.
Yeah, especially someone you trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you describe your artistic approach? Like, when you're looking at like something, like, let's say even as a viewer, right? Because I think once we start doing something for a while, like I was with a friend earlier who makes empanadas, right? And we went to a restaurant and tried someone else's empanadas, and it's a completely different vibe. If you're just trying this, I'm hungry, versus I'm trying this for research and comparison. And from a critical standpoint.
Thing. Yeah.
So how has your approach maybe shifted on how you maybe consume media, maybe how you consume things that can potentially impact how you do your work? How's your approach really changed since you've gone into a more full-time role as an artist?
Very interesting. Very good question. I am very particular about the media I consume, about the books I read, about, the movies I watch, the music I listen to, just because it's interesting. I hate the term bad art, but for the sake of lack of words, I'll just use it.
Sure.
Bad art tends to influence how I make my art, right? If I see something that is not necessarily how I want my work to go, it tends to stay with me. It stays with me and it shows up in my work in a way. I'm very, very, and it's interesting. The more I create, the more I become this way. Very particular about the movies I watch as well. I tend to now only want to watch indie films and Festival de Cannes, films like that. My husband's like, "You've become a film snob." I'm like, "Very much so," but it's not because it's because I have to be careful about what I ingest, because it comes out later in my work. And so with that, I'm very, even the books I read, very particular about that. My approach sometimes, after I've gotten all of those, those inspirations and things like that, sometimes it's smooth. Sometimes I can just go into my studio and work, and it's just flows and it's oh, I've completed a piece in a day. But sometimes it's I have to struggle, right? It's like a storm. I have to go back and rework it. And I'll go through these moments of hating it and loving it and crying and screaming and being happy. And, it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, we're sensitive.
Yeah, we're very sensitive. Yes, absolutely.
I'm looking and I'm recording from my my home studio right now, and I'm looking at a few paintings that I did. I had this goal back in 2016. I didn't complete it, but I had this goal in 2016 of doing one painting per month, and just seeing if I could do it. Because I used to do murals when I was a lot younger, and I hadn't picked up a paintbrush in 15, maybe closer to 20 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I was just let's just see what I get. And I'm looking at one in particular. It was weird. It was about it was just feelings on a canvas, right? But it has the color and some of the imagery from the Low End Theory Tribe Called Quest album. And I'm like, why did I choose that? Why was that on my mind?
Yeah.
So definitely being cognizant of what you're consuming and what it is. It's almost like this vibe of garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage out. And also the people you surround yourself with, they're to come, I have moments where I have to shut off everything, pull myself away from people, not in, negative way, but it's just, I have to just be alone because I can't have any kind of distractions or influences or things like that. So it's a very sensitive process.
It's funny that you kind of moved into that, because I wrote a question that you don't have that relates to that, which is really funny. So I know that, it's not cliquish, right? But I know that I don't hang around a lot of podcasters, but I do hang around artists and chefs and things of that sort. So do you hang around any artists? And if so, what are the benefits have you found of hanging around artists or hanging around with artists or creative types? Is it conversation that you're like, oh, you go through that? Is it a sounding board? Tell me about those sorts of instances.
I do hang around artists. I tend to like to hang around artists who I consider to be more advanced than I am. So they've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years. Longer than I have, because I need that inspiration. I need that critique. I need that feedback. And so I don't have a large group of friends. I have a few friends, and I like that because I can really maintain the relationships. But yeah, they serve as mentors. We feed off each other. They help me. I help them. Critique the work. Help me. Just talk about our process, talk about what we're working on at the moment, and just kind of inspire each other in that way. And so, yes, I do enjoy having, and they're not always just visual artists, right? I enjoy having a group of creatives, just creative people. And not always, sometimes you kind of need the practical one in the group that kind of helps you, get back down to earth and figure out how things truly work.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to have a good balance of both types of people.
Balance is important. Balance is so important. I've used the terminology. You have why people and you have how people. You have people who are like visionaries, ideators. I think that I'm more in that lane. But when it comes to the details, sometimes that could be a bit of an issue for me. Because it's like, hey, I'm too busy doing great things. Oh, really? I gotta eat food? Nah.
Yeah, exactly. I have to drink water? What do you mean?
This is water you speak of.
That's the sleep you speak of.
Right. No time for sleep. We're creating, man.
Exactly.
Which part of the creative process do you enjoy most, and which one do you enjoy least? And why would that be the case?
I will say, truly completing a piece and saying, okay, yes, this piece is finished. For me, is the part that I enjoy the most. The least is having to wrestle with it, and I find that I'm having to wrestle a lot with oil painting. You can go anywhere with it, right? But it's just, sometimes you're like, God, you start like, I really love this piece. It's going to be great. And then you stop and you're like, oh, I hate this piece. And then you go back to, okay, let me see what I can do and it's just like just going back and forth. That has to be my least favorite part of the process, just because it can be draining, It's going to be like, and sometimes the work is great, but you just don't see it. Either you've been looking at it for too long or, so sometimes it's good to just kind of step away and not look at it for a few days and come back. And things like that. But yeah, having to wrestle with the work is definitely my least favorite bit of the process.
Yeah, I had the same thing sort of like with doing this and really being very sensitive about what I was putting out there. And I would go through and look for every in a podcast and I would recognize that it was taken away from what the ethos, I guess. And I feel so pretentious talking like this, but it would take away from what the goal is of having a conversation. And a conversation has imperfections in there. It has
that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just like, do I want to sacrifice what this actually is for something that feels super polished and super edited? It's like going back to what you were touching on, and movies. I watch movies and I'm a bit of a movie snob, and I sometimes can see where it's like, that was a bad edit right there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's up with that? Like, what's up with those color theories? What's up with that dialogue? Yeah, same way.
So I got two more real questions, and then even you, Lewinale, you get the rapid fire questions as well. So you'll have a couple of those towards the end. But does your work fall closer to passion or curiosity, and why?
It's always passion. It's always passion for me. I cannot remember a time where my work was about curiosity, and maybe that might change in the future. But for me, it is always about passion. Yeah.
Lastly, how do you see your work developing over the course of the next year or so?
Definitely going to keep exploring oil painting for at least a year, I would say. I might venture into sculpting and different forms of art making, because I do enjoy not remaining constant and not having to just do one media or one, form of visual art making for a long time. But at some point exploring sculpture, but I think I'm going to stick with oils for a bit, until I feel like I want to move on to something else. But for now, oil painting. Yeah.
And I think that actually might be, and pardon me if this comes off in the wrong way, but that might actually be where the curiosity is at.
It might be, yeah.
Kind of extending and trying out different methods and different styles, because, I think if you're saying, oh, I'm going to do this for a bit, no, try that. It's like, oh, you're going after this. I like it. I like hearing it. It's like degree of difficulty.
Yeah. It's a good challenge. I like a good challenge. So, it's good.
It helps you determine where your limits are at, and
learn more about yourself.
Yeah. And it's very rare, but there are some times where I'll write questions and I'm like, I need to have questions, right? Where, the guests are like, oh, I'll just wing it. I was like, sure, because some of these require some thought. Yeah, I got it. It's like, cool. And it's like, maybe you're really good at it. But some people, I find, they have a little bit more of a weighted head about things. It's like, yeah, I'm really good. It's like, it's a lot of ums. I got to edit out.
Yeah.
So I want to hit you with some rapid fire questions. I got a couple of them for you. They're fun. Yeah, I think you'll get a kick out of them.
Okay.
I'm going to start off with this question. It's music related.
Okay.
If your artwork were music, what would its genre be?
Woof. If my artwork with music, what would its genre be? I'm sure there's a name for this, and pardon me, but I can't think of it. But there's like a genre where it's like kind of undefined. It's kind of new age, kind of not like, it's not hip hop, it's not country, it's not rock, it's not electronic. It's just like a new kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, I just don't think it fits into a category. That's the thing. That's the thing about it. Sometimes I'm creating and I'm totally in like this rock metal mood, and sometimes I'm in like a hip hop mood. Sometimes I'm in like a smooth kind of, like R&B mood. It just really depends. It's hard to categorize. Sorry if that doesn't answer your question.
No. I think it's interesting to see like kind of how people reframe what they do. Like, the question, it used to be like, from a personality standpoint, which genre of music do you relate to most? And
got it.
Yeah, and I had to like switch it like to maybe someone's work. But I think when I'm like working on questions, or if I'm editing or whatever I'm doing pertaining to my sort of work, I'm playing something. And let's say if I'm coding, for sake of argument, I am listening to something with no lyrics. It might be some hard bop jazz. It might be something that's electronic. It might be movie scores.
It's always different. Yeah, it's always different.
Do you have a favorite number? And if so, does it have any significance or meaning?
Do I have a favorite? Probably the number 3. Does it have significance or meaning? No, but I like the way it makes me feel.
Then that's the significance and meaning.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, the number 3.
What's your go-to snack? Like you have that moment where you're like, all right, I need to eat something begrudgingly. And what is that go-to snack for you?
Olives at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's probably like for me, like a Rice Krispie treat and a Topo Chico.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm one of those guys. It's just spicy water and bricks of carbs. That's just what it is.
Yeah, I'm totally into olives at the moment. I don't know what it is, but I'm just like super into olives right now.
Let's see. I got 2 more for you. What are your 3 most used colors in your palette? Like, there are certain colors that you're using, and why would you use those colors? What commonly comes up in your work?
At the moment, red, yellow, and a bit of teal or blue. It's interesting because before I was using a cooler palette. Now I'm using like a warmer palette, probably to signify intensity. It's interesting. I tend to constantly be drawn to those colors, and I try to venture off and try other colors in my work, but I'm constantly drawn to these warmer colors. So, yeah, those are the colors.
Thank you. And lastly, words matter, right?
Yes.
And you can frame this because I feel like you might be a bit of a polyglot. I'm not sure, but I get that vibe. What, in your opinion, is the most powerful word?
Love. Love to me, that's the most powerful word. Yeah.
100%. So that's pretty much it. That's all the questions that I have. You've done well. We've gotten through it. And we've had a great time. At least I've had a great time. I want to.
I have too.
Thank you. I want to thank you for being on this podcast, and I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners where they can check your workout, website, social media. The floor is yours.
Okay. So my Instagram, I'll start with my social media. It's my first name, which is Lewinale, Lewinale. My website's the same, lewinale.com. So that's pretty much it. Just type in my name, you'll find all the information.
So there you have it, folks. I want to thank the great Lewinale Havette for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there is art and artists in and around your neck of the woods. You just got to look for them.